Hi, so here we are at our third chapter that we're covering in our course, and this is your payoff for your patience with research methods and biology. Here we are at consciousness, which for many of you, I think as I promised in a previous lecture, for many of you, this is what you imagined psychology would be. And so here it is. And from here on out, I think the whole course will actually feel much more like what you imagined we would be studying. But we will draw heavily on both your understanding of research methods, but especially your understanding of biopsychology to make sense of everything from this point on. So let's get started. When we define consciousness, we're talking about awareness of self and environment. And so this is not the same as conscience, right, which is about morality or ethics. This is conscious. Consciousness is that as you're sitting here, hopefully you are maintaining awareness of my voice and perhaps the words on the screen, and maybe less awareness of other things in your environment, but of other things about yourself. You're very, very hungry or thirsty, or there's loud noise in your environment, might be distracting you and then make it harder for you to pay attention to this. And we're going to talk a lot about those choices. Part of what is really important, the most central concepts as we talk about consciousness, are going to be the idea of selective attention and a very related term of dual processing. But one basic thing to understand is that at any given moment, we can only pay attention to one thing at a time. And the idea of multitasking is really impossible. We can't multitask in the sense that we can't pay attention to more than one thing right at that moment. We can switch back and forth, which is what most of us mean by multitasking, that we read the chapter for a little while, and then we look up at the television for a little bit, and then we look back at the chapter for a little bit, and then we listen to music for a little bit, right? That is a switching exercise, and we can do that pretty rapidly. But what's really clear is that if you try to multitask in that way, that it will take you longer to read the textbook chapter if you're doing that than if you just sat without distractions and read the textbook chapter. You may choose to do the switching thing, but you just need to know that you're not actually doing two things at once. And so the idea of selective attention is tied to this idea of dual process. The fact that we're always making choices. Dual obviously refers to the idea of two, and the fact that we're always making choices means that we have this two-track mind. We have the conscious track, the track of what we're aware that we're paying attention to, and then we have the unconscious or subconscious track, which is all of the things that we have decided to screen out. And so we're going to talk a lot about the idea of screening in. The thing that seems that we should pay attention to, the thing that grabs our attention, gets screened in. Everything else gets screened out. And we're not aware that we're doing that. We're doing that pretty automatically. In fact, you all, I'm sure, have had the experience of wanting very much to screen something in because it's important in one way or the other, and yet you can't keep your attention off of something else. So this is not always, it's often not in our control. And so, right, so this is a model that you see here in green. The one thing we screen in, that's our conscious process. That's the two-track mind. That's the conscious or aware track. And everything else here in red, like anything else going on, is screened out. So, if you're sitting in a classroom, if things are going well for me, right? If we were in a classroom together, or even right now, you're screening in the sound of my voice, you're screening in the image of me talking, maybe, you're screening in the words on the PowerPoint slide, maybe, and that's what is grabbing that priority spot, and everything else around you. So you can stop for a moment and look around and listen and think about all the things that you hopefully are not paying attention to. So if you live in a house with other people, I bet if you stopped and listened, even if they're not in the room with you, you could probably hear them or hear evidence of them. You might have a pet who is walking around the room or panting or making other noise that you're managing to screen out, to deprioritize. Maybe you have music playing, but if things are going well and I'm holding your attention, you maybe couldn't tell me the name of the last song that played. Maybe there's street noise. All of that hopefully is getting screened out. And will continue to get screened out until it becomes more important. We are always screening in the thing that is most interesting, important, or compelling, which means that sometimes you might be trying to listen to these lecture videos and you know that they're important in terms of your grade and learning, but there might be other things that are more interesting. You're listening to friends or siblings or somebody talk about, gossip about people in the next room, and that is more interesting than my lecture. Or you're really hungry, as I said before, and that feels to your brain really important, and it's hard to ignore the fact that you're really hungry. It's really hard for any of us, for example, to ignore the urge to go to the bathroom. We have to urinate. It's really hard to pay attention to other things while we're having that experience, right? Some things just feel really interesting, important, or compelling, and they're hard to ignore because they're hard to screen out. And so there are some things that always win. I just said, like the urge to go, the feeling that you have to go to the bathroom is one of them. Our name, it's really hard for us to ignore our name. And so you can think of many of us, probably most of us have been in a situation out in public where somebody is calling someone else who has our same name. And no matter how many times we tell ourselves they're not calling us, our brain perks up and listens, right? It gives that sound of somebody calling our name the priority spot because we've decided that that's always important. Um, some of you maybe when you were growing up had the experience of trying to get your mother's attention. And maybe you're saying mom, mommy, mom, mom. There's a whole Family Guy riff on this, right? And says mom, mommy, mom, mom, mommy. And she's managing to ignore you. And then some of you may have decided that to get her attention, you were going to say her first name. And maybe that worked, that you say her first name, you say Carol, and she turns around and looks at you. And it really is very telling, right? That she has decided that the sound of her first name is interesting, important, or compelling, but the sound of you saying mommy is not. So make of that what you will. We also sometimes screen out our entire environment. So the times when we daydream, especially if we daydream deeply, we do that most often when we're bored. And so I'm sure many of you have had the experience of sitting in class or someplace else and getting completely lost in your own thoughts and your internal landscape. And that is you screening out your environment and screening in your internal world. You guys have a discussion where you're asked to talk about this a little bit more, so hopefully you'll engage with these ideas there as well. Sometimes people don't really understand the fact that we are always scanning our environment because it's outside of our awareness, right? And so we're not aware that we're doing that. But there's something called the cocktail party phenomena, which and it could just be the party phenomenon, it doesn't have to be a cocktail party. And the idea is that if you or I are having a conversation, I'm screening our conversation in. There's all of these other conversations happening around us, and I'm able to screen those out and ignore those. And I don't know what anyone else is talking about because you have my attention, and that's what I'm screening in and my priority spot. But if somebody on the other side of the room starts talking about me, they say my name, or they start talking about something else that is interesting, important, or compelling to me, then my attention goes there, whether I want it to or not. And so you might be somebody very important to me. This conversation might be very important, but I'm suddenly having a hard time listening because my brain is going over there to listen because that feels more important. And I might be nodding and I'm as you're talking, but I'm really listening over there, even if I don't want to be. And so it's evidence that even that no matter what is happening, we are always scanning our environment to see if there is something more interesting or compelling that we should be paying attention to. And that's happening all of the time in the background of our attention. So states of consciousness, when we talk about altered states of consciousness, altered states are really when we make different choices about what gets screened in or what gets screened out. And so that our decisions about what's important or compelling, the likelihood that certain things get screened in or screened out is changes. And so we're going to pause here and pick up with a relatively short video to follow this about the beginning of talking about states of consciousness and also about hypnosis.